Have you ever wondered what would happen if, in the first seconds after death, you refused to walk into the famous tunnel of white light? What if that bright, welcoming glow was not what humanity has always been told, but something far more complex, far older, and perhaps not as benevolent as it appears? Why do so many ancient texts warn about luminous beings who imitate guides? And why did early Gnostics insist that the soul must not follow the first light it sees? For thousands of years, different traditions described a moment of decision after the final breath. Modern near-death testimonies talk about a tunnel, a bright presence, a sense of peace. But ancient esoteric schools, mystery cults, and certain Gnostic sects said something radically different, that there is a choice, a secret crossroads, and that not every soul should walk toward the brilliance that calls to them. According to these teachings, the light may be real, but its purpose might not be what most people believe. Look closely at the image on your screen. A human figure stands before a monumental vortex of light, almost irresistible. Yet the path behind him is dark, silent, and infinite. This is the moment no one talks about, the instant in which a soul can hesitate, the instant in which a soul can say no. If the tunnel is truly a passage of liberation, why would refusing it even be an option? And if it is a trap, why has the truth been hidden for so long? Some ancient lines from the Nag Hammadi texts describe powerful entities who constructed illusions to recycle human consciousness. Some scholars believe that these descriptions may be related to what many call the white light trap. Other traditions, like Tibetan teachings and early hermetic writings, also speak about radiant gateways designed to attract unprepared souls. So the question becomes unavoidable: who built the tunnel? And what happens if you step aside instead of stepping through? If you are already feeling that this topic shakes something inside you, stay with me until the end. What we are about to explore may change the way you understand death, consciousness, and the afterlife. And if you are someone who seeks hidden truths that were buried or distorted over the centuries, consider subscribing to this channel. It helps keep these revelations alive and ensures you won't miss the mysteries we uncover next. For most people, the idea of a radiant tunnel appearing right after death feels comforting, almost natural, as if it were an unquestionable part of human destiny. But what if this image was not universal? What if the tunnel of light is a concept that only became dominant after the rise of certain religious systems, while older civilizations described a very different passage? This is where the central problem begins. Many ancient traditions do not speak of a tunnel at all, but warn of illusions, gatekeepers, and luminous traps crafted to redirect the soul. When we compare these sources, a disturbing question emerges. Has the modern world been given a simplified version of the afterlife, one cleaned and polished to hide a more complex spiritual landscape? If so, who simplified it, and why? The Gnostics were among the first to challenge the idea of a benevolent post-mortem light. Their texts describe the moment after death as a confrontation with archons, cosmic forces that imitate divinity but lack true spiritual essence. For the Gnostics, the soul does not automatically ascend. Instead, it journeys through layers of deception created by the demiurge, a lesser creator who governs the material universe. They believed that this being constructed structures meant to recycle souls back into human bodies, ensuring they never awaken to their own divine origin. Some scholars interpret the tunnel as one of these structures, a luminous mechanism that appears beautiful but functions as a form of spiritual magnetism, pulling souls back into a cycle of amnesia and rebirth. Whether literal or symbolic, the warning is clear. Not everything that shines is a path to freedom. If this sounds far-fetched, consider the testimony found in ancient Egyptian funerary texts. Instead of describing a welcoming light, they depict tests, questions, and barriers that the soul must pass through using knowledge and awareness. The Egyptians believed that being passive in the afterlife was dangerous. Only conscious choice could protect the soul from being captured or misled. Similar warnings appear in Tibetan teachings, where the deceased encounters radiant visions that must be recognized as projections, not imitations. Failure to remain aware leads to reincarnation. These parallels create a troubling pattern. Cultures separated by thousands of miles and centuries describe the afterlife not as an automatic path, but as a spiritual challenge, one that requires discernment rather than blind acceptance. But then, how did the modern idea of the tunnel become so universal? Some researchers argue that institutions across history simplified death narratives to reduce fear and maintain social stability. A comforting afterlife encourages obedience. A complex one encourages questioning. The early church also emphasized obedience to heavenly beings and discouraged interpretations that suggested hidden powers or cosmic rulers. Over time, the narrative of a single, unquestionable light became dominant. It was easier to preach, it was easier to control, and it erased the ancient idea that the soul must choose, must awaken, must discern truth from illusion. Whether intentional or accidental, this shift turned humanity into passive travelers rather than conscious navigators. If the tunnel is a construct, then refusing it becomes an act of spiritual rebellion, a moment in which the soul claims its autonomy. And here is where your curiosity becomes essential. Would you, personally, walk toward the light? Or would you feel something inside warning you that the path might not be as simple as it looks? Leave your thoughts in the comments, because perspectives differ widely, and each viewpoint reveals how humans relate to the unknown. As we dive deeper, keep your mind open. The truth has layers, and the oldest ones were buried for a reason. To understand what truly happens when a soul refuses the tunnel of light, we must look at the oldest sources humanity preserved, not the modern interpretations, but the texts written when mystical traditions still spoke openly about cosmic structures. When we explore the Nag Hammadi library, the Pistis Sophia, Tibetan teachings from the Bardo Theodol, and certain pre-Christian mystery schools, a very different picture of the afterlife emerges. These texts do not describe a passive journey guided by benevolent beings, but a conscious passage, where awareness is the only shield against deception. The image you chose for your thumbnail, a lone figure standing before a blinding vortex, mirrors this ancient idea. The moment of death is not a surrender, but a test. The light is powerful, breathtaking, irresistible, but the traditions warn that its purpose may not be what it seems. In the hypostasis of the archons, the Gnostics describe cosmic rulers who fashioned a likeness of light to lure souls back into the system governed by the demiurge. According to them, the true divine source lies beyond all forms and beyond all visible radiance, meaning that anything the soul sees immediately after death might be part of the material world's illusion. The Gnostics taught that the soul, when freed from the body, must recognize the false light and avoid being trapped by it. Some scholars interpret this as symbolic language, but others believe it describes an actual metaphysical structure, a luminous mechanism designed to recycle consciousness. The key message remains the same. Awareness allows escape. Confusion leads to return. This interpretation aligns with the idea of refusing the tunnel as a legitimate and spiritually advanced choice. The Tibetan Book of the Dead echoes this logic in surprising detail. It explains that the soul will encounter radiant visions in luminous beings, but it warns that not all lights lead to liberation. Some guide the soul upward, while others lure it back toward rebirth. Tibetan masters insisted that the soul must stay calm, present, and free of fear to discern truth from illusion. If the soul becomes overwhelmed or dazzled by the first light it sees, it becomes easy prey for forces that pull it back into samsara, the endless cycle of reincarnation. This overlaps remarkably with Gnostic teachings, despite emerging from a different cultural and historical lineage. Two worlds, two traditions, one message. The afterlife contains deceptive luminosity, and intuition alone is not enough to navigate it. Let us also consider the hermetic writings, which describe 7 spheres ruled by archontic forces that the soul must pass through to reach its true origin. These rulers question, mislead, and attempt to reclaim the soul. Light appears often in these passages, but it is not always a symbol of salvation. Sometimes it represents the brilliance of illusion, a radiance designed to evoke surrender. The hermeticists believed that only the soul that retains memory of its divine nature can pass through these luminous barriers untouched. The soul that forgets is redirected downward. This raises a powerful question for you, the viewer. If you were standing before the ultimate light, would you remember who you truly are? Or would you trust the first voice that calls your name? Across these texts, a forbidden map begins to form, a map of a multidimensional afterlife where consciousness meets tests, illusions, and radiant traps. This map was never meant to frighten, but to empower. It suggests that death is not the end, but a journey that requires choice, clarity, and awareness. And if refusing the tunnel is one of these choices, then it means the soul possesses far more freedom than modern religions typically acknowledge. But why was this map hidden? Why did later institutions decide to suppress or sanitize these teachings? As we continue, the answers will become clearer. For now, share in the comments whether you feel these ancient descriptions resonate with your intuition. Do you think the tunnel is a guide or a mechanism? Your view matters, because the next revelation depends on how deeply we are willing to question what we've been taught. If we want to understand what truly happens when a soul refuses the tunnel after death, we must decode the symbols surrounding it. The radiant tunnel, the blinding white glow, the sensation of being called. These images appear in near-death accounts all over the world. But when we compare them with ancient Gnostic, hermetic, and esoteric teachings, a pattern emerges. The tunnel seems to function not merely as a passage, but as a mechanism, a funnel designed to guide energy toward a specific destination. The Gnostics believed that the demiurge and his archons controlled structures within the lower heavens, including luminous gateways. These gateways appeared divine, but were actually part of a cosmic recycling system that kept human souls trapped in cycles of incarnation. The tunnel may therefore symbolize the moment in which the soul is offered an easy path, a familiar glow instead of conscious choice. In the Pistis Sophia, one of the most revealing Gnostic texts, the archons are described as imitators of light who surround the soul and attempt to pull it downward by invoking memories, emotions, and attachments. They project images of comfort, including familiar faces and peaceful sensations, to convince the soul to follow them. Some researchers interpret this as a description of the tunnel phenomenon, a radiant environment engineered to evoke surrender. The moment the soul accepts the illusion, it becomes susceptible to forgetting its divine nature. This amnesia is crucial because, according to the Gnostics, awakening is the only threat to the archon's control. If the soul realized its true origin, beyond the demiurge, beyond material existence, the cycle of reincarnation would lose its power. In this framework, refusing the tunnel becomes not an act of confusion, but an act of remembrance. Symbols of radiant traps also appear in early Christian mysticism, though in softened form. Some apocryphal writings hint at the existence of false angels of light, echoing the warning found in 2 Corinthians, that even dark forces can disguise themselves as messengers of radiance. The idea is not to instill fear, but to encourage discernment. Light is not always synonymous with liberation, and darkness is not always synonymous with danger. The image you selected for your thumbnail captures this tension perfectly. The figure stands before a blinding aperture that feels both welcoming and overwhelming. The path is illuminated, yet the surrounding space hints at mysteries hidden beyond visibility. This visual ambiguity aligns with the ancient teaching that the soul must be able to see through the light, not merely walk toward it. Even more intriguing is the hermetic belief that the soul passes through celestial gates, guarded by beings who test its knowledge and spiritual maturity. These guardians often appear luminous, yet demand recognition. If the soul cannot identify them or lacks the understanding needed to pass, it is redirected or pulled back into density. This concept strongly supports the idea that the afterlife contains choices, and that not all lights lead upward. Some hermetic passages explicitly warn that souls who follow the first shining presence they encounter are the ones most easily recycled, while those who pause, observe, and question continue toward higher realms. This suggests that refusing the tunnel is not only possible, but may be a sign of elevated awareness. But how did this idea become taboo? Over centuries, institutions sought to protect believers from fear and doubt, emphasizing obedience to divine beings and discouraging any interpretation that suggested deception in the afterlife. A single clear narrative, follow the light, replaced the ancient understanding that the soul must discern, not merely accept. By simplifying the story, society lost the notion that the soul possesses agency even in death. What was once a conscious spiritual navigation became a passive expectation, and the consequences of this shift are profound. Now I ask you, does the idea that light may hide a test resonate with you, or does it challenge your beliefs? Do you think a soul should automatically trust what appears after death, or should it question everything, even the light itself? Share your thoughts below, because these questions shape how we understand the next revelation. What actually happens when the soul refuses the tunnel? If multiple ancient traditions warned that the first light encountered after death may not be a path to true liberation, then how did modern spirituality come to treat the tunnel as sacred, comforting, and unquestionably divine? To answer this, we must examine how religious institutions, political powers, and cultural narratives shaped humanity's view of the afterlife. The early church, for example, inherited a world full of diverse mystical schools: Gnostics, Hermeticists, Essenes, Orphics, Zoroastrians, all of which offered complex and sometimes unsettling descriptions of what lies beyond death. These teachings emphasized the soul's autonomy and the existence of cosmic structures that do not always work in humanity's favor. But as Christianity became institutionalized, leaders sought a more unified and controllable doctrine. A simple afterlife, bright light, angels, heaven, was easier to teach than a universe filled with layers of deception and spiritual tests. Complexity inspires questioning. Simplicity inspires obedience. The Gnostic view, which presented the world as controlled by the demiurge and his archons, was especially threatening to religious authorities. It implied that salvation could not be obtained through external obedience, but through inner awakening, a realization of one's true divine nature. This perspective shifted spiritual power away from institutions and toward individuals. As a result, Gnostic texts were suppressed, reinterpreted, or destroyed. Teachings about luminous traps, deceptive beings, and the need for discernment after death were labeled heresy. Over time, what remained was a sanitized version of esoteric truth, an afterlife narrative that preserved the imagery of light but stripped away the warnings. The tunnel became a symbol of salvation rather than a crossroads requiring awareness. Political systems also benefited from this shift. A population that fears death is easier to control, but so is a population that believes it has a guaranteed place in paradise as long as it obeys worldly authorities. Giving people a comforting afterlife story reduces existential anxiety, stabilizes society, and reinforces the authority of those who claim to interpret divine will. It was not necessarily malicious, it was pragmatic. But in the process, the older, more nuanced understanding of the afterlife was reduced to a single path: follow the light. No questions, no alternatives, no personal sovereignty. This cultural narrowing transformed what was once a vast spiritual map into a one-way corridor. The rise of science in the modern era further removed the esoteric dimension from mainstream thought. Near-death experiences, once analyzed through spiritual frameworks, began to be interpreted neurologically. The tunnel effect was explained through optical phenomena, lack of oxygen, or brain chemistry. While these interpretations added valuable insight, they also overshadowed millennia of metaphysical knowledge. People stopped asking esoteric questions and started trusting whatever narrative society fed them, whether religious or scientific. The possibility that the tunnel could be both real and part of the spiritual mechanism became almost unthinkable. Yet the ancient warnings did not vanish. They simply moved underground, preserved by occult circles and mystics who insisted that death remains a conscious journey. This brings us to the present. If the tunnel is a structure created within the lower realms, whether symbolic or metaphysical, then the truth about it needed to be hidden from humanity to maintain the cycle. A soul that knows it has a choice is a soul that cannot be easily redirected. A soul that questions does not automatically surrender. And a soul that refuses the tunnel threatens the entire architecture of spiritual control described in ancient Gnostic texts. This is why so many traditions emphasize, know the path before walking it. Awareness is liberation. Ignorance is captivity. So now I want to hear from you. Do you believe the truth about the afterlife was hidden deliberately? Or do you think it was simply lost over time? Does the idea of a white light trap feel like a revelation? Or does it challenge everything you've been taught? Leave your thoughts in the comments. Your perspective creates the next layer of this investigation, and the next block will take us into Forbidden's territory, the turning point, what actually happens when the soul refuses the tunnel. Now we finally approach the moment the ancient texts hint at, but never fully explain. The instant a soul refuses to enter the tunnel. Imagine the scene again, the one captured in your thumbnail image. A lone figure, freshly separated from the body, stands before an overwhelming vortex of pure white light. Everything in that moment pushes the soul forward. Comfort, familiarity, the illusion of reunion with loved ones, the promise of peace. But what happens when the soul does not move, when it hesitates, when it steps away from the glow? Many ancient teachings describe this refusal as an act of profound spiritual strength. It is the moment when the soul asserts awareness instead of instinct, choice instead of surrender. According to Gnostic interpretations, this single decision reveals whether the consciousness has awakened or remains bound to the cycle imposed by the archons. Some Gnostic texts describe that if the soul refuses the artificial light, the illusion begins to dissolve. The brilliance flickers, the comforting voices fade, and the constructs designed to lure the soul collapse. Without the tunnel's magnetic pull, the soul becomes aware of other paths, darker, quieter, and infinitely more expansive. These paths are rarely discussed in mainstream spirituality because they do not offer instant reassurance. They represent the unknown, the unfiltered truth beyond conditioned beliefs. In the Book of the Great Invisible Spirit, there is a passage suggesting that the awakened soul is not seized by the luminous snares, and, instead, passes through the silence toward the real. That silence, according to some scholars, symbolizes the doorway to higher realms ungoverned by the demiurge. Refusing the tunnel is therefore not a rejection of salvation, but a rejection of illusion. In Tibetan teachings, something similar occurs. The soul that does not cling to radiant visions begins to perceive subtler lights that ordinary consciousness cannot recognize. These subtler lights correspond to higher states of being, the clear light of the void, which Tibetans describe as the ultimate reality. This light is not a tunnel, nor does it call or pull. It simply exists, silent and steady, waiting for the soul that has the clarity to merge with it. The Tibetan masters say that only the soul free from fear, desire, and confusion can recognize this true light. All others are drawn into the brighter, louder, more emotional illusions that lead back into rebirth. This aligns perfectly with the Gnostic idea that the first luminous structure is a decoy, while the true divine realm remains hidden, quiet, and inaccessible to the unawakened. Hermetic writings add yet another layer. When the soul steps away from the false light, it is said to encounter the intermediate space, a vast spiritual field where no entity, archontic or divine, interferes. This space is where the soul sees itself clearly for the first time, stripped of all earthly identity and memory. In this state, it remembers its origin. According to Hermetic tradition, This remembrance is the key that opens the gates to the higher heavens. But if the soul follows the tunnel, it never reaches this state. Instead, it enters a controlled cycle that erases memory and recycles consciousness back into physical form. Refusal is therefore not rebellion, it is return. But what does this mean in a more practical, lived sense? It means that refusing the tunnel is an act of spiritual maturity, the soul's recognition that it no longer needs intermediaries or cosmic structures to guide it. It stands alone, aware, sovereign. It sees through the illusion of the luminous trap. And once this happens, everything changes. The soul begins to rise, not toward a tunnel, but toward a vast, borderless expanse that ancient mystics described as the realm of pure being. From here, the journey continues in ways that words struggle to express. Now let me ask you, if you were standing before the tunnel, feeling its pull, sensing its beauty, hearing the familiar voices, would you walk into it? Or would you turn away to explore the unknown? Leave your answer in the comments. Your intuition is part of this revelation. Because in the next block, we explore the consequence of this choice, how refusing the tunnel affects your spiritual destiny today, in this lifetime. If the soul's refusal of the tunnel after death represents a moment of awakening, then the implications extend far beyond the afterlife. According to ancient Gnostic, hermetic, and Eastern teachings, consciousness is not shaped only in the instant of death. It is shaped now, through the choices we make, the awareness we cultivate, and the illusions we learn to see through. Refusing the tunnel symbolizes the soul's ability to break free from automatic responses, whether emotional, mental, or spiritual. And the more a person trains this awareness in life, the stronger the soul becomes when the great transition arrives. In other words, the refusal begins long before death. It begins with questioning the stories we've been taught about reality, identity, and destiny. Gnostic teachers insisted that awakening was not a mystical event reserved for special individuals, but a gradual unveiling. Every time you resist manipulation, every time you question a narrative that society presents as unquestionable truth, every time you feel an inner voice telling you to step away from something that everyone else is running toward, you are rehearsing the refusal of the tunnel. You are strengthening the part of your soul that recognizes illusion. In the Gospel of Thomas, Jesus says, "If you bring forth what is within you, what is within you will save you." Many scholars believe this refers precisely to the soul's inner knowledge, the gnosis that allows it to perceive the true path after death. So when you cultivate awareness, when you seek truth beyond appearances, you are preparing your consciousness for the greatest choice it will ever face. Eastern teachings echo this with remarkable clarity. The Tibetan masters believe that how a person responds to fear, desire, and attachment during life mirrors how their soul will respond in the bardo, the realm after death. If you cling to comfort, you will cling to the illusory light. If you panic in darkness, you will run toward the first glow that promises safety. But if you learn to remain present within discomfort, if you develop inner stillness, then your soul will not be intimidated by the silence beyond the tunnel. You will have the strength to choose the higher path, the one described as the entrance to the clear light, the true origin of consciousness. So the refusal is not about rebellion. It is about readiness. It is about cultivating a soul that no longer needs illusions to feel safe. Hermetic tradition offers a more psychological interpretation. It teaches that the universe mirrors your inner world. A soul trapped in internal conflict will be drawn to structures that reinforce its confusion. A soul that seeks the light out of fear of darkness will be drawn to the brightest illusion. But a soul that has confronted its shadow, that has embraced both its strengths and wounds, becomes impossible to manipulate. This soul, according to the Hermeticists, is the one that bypasses the archons, the one that rises beyond the spheres, the one that refuses the first light because it recognizes that the true divine does not force, does not pull, and does not imitate. The real light waits, quietly, patiently. So what does this mean for you watching this right now? It means that your spiritual destiny is not determined by sacred texts, external authorities, or cosmic beings. It is shaped by your own awareness, by your willingness to question, to explore, to perceive what others overlook, by the courage to stand still in the presence of overwhelming light and ask yourself, is this real? Does this resonate with my deepest essence? If you can do that now, in the small choices, the everyday distractions, the subtle illusions around you, then your soul is already preparing for the moment of transition. You are training the ability to step back from the tunnel, to see its architecture, to choose your own path instead of following the one constructed for you. And now I ask you directly, do you feel deep inside that your soul is awakening to something bigger than the stories you were told? Do you sense that your destiny might be your own creation, not predetermined by any system, earthly or cosmic? Share your thoughts in the comments, because your reflection adds to the collective search for truth. And next, in the final revelation, we will bring everything together, what the refusal of the tunnel really means for the soul's eternal journey. When all the ancient warnings, hidden symbols, and forbidden teachings are placed side by side, a single revelation becomes impossible to ignore. The soul is not meant to be a passive traveler in the afterlife. It is meant to choose. It is meant to discern. It is meant to awaken to its own origin. The tunnel of white light, whether understood literally or symbolically, represents the familiar path, the one shaped by collective belief, religious narratives, and cosmic structures that may not always support true liberation. Refusing it does not mean rejecting love, peace, or divinity. It means rejecting illusion. It means trusting the inner spark that ancient mystics insisted was the soul's only true compass. And when a consciousness is strong enough to do that, its journey transforms completely. The teachings we explored, Gnostic, hermetic, Tibetan, Egyptian, all suggest in their own language that the highest realms are not loud, right, or demanding. They do not call your name, do not imitate your loved ones, do not pull you in with promises of comfort. The true light is silent. It allows. It respects. It awaits. This is why the soul that refuses the tunnel is not lost or punished. It is liberated from the architecture of control. It moves outward, not downward. It ascends toward a space that ancient mystics described as the origin of all consciousness, the realm beyond the demiurge, beyond illusion, beyond reincarnation. And that possibility, that sovereignty, is what was hidden from humanity for centuries. So now the final question returns to you. If the afterlife is a landscape shaped by awareness, what role will your consciousness play in it? Do you feel more prepared, more awake, more capable of choosing your own path after hearing these revelations? Share your thoughts in the comments, because engaging with this knowledge is part of keeping these forgotten truths alive. When you comment, like, and subscribe, you are not just supporting a channel, you are strengthening a community of seekers who refuse to let ancient wisdom be buried again. You are helping to preserve the memory of teachings that were once erased, distorted, or silenced. And as you leave this video, I want to leave you with a final reflection. If the soul truly carries the spark of the divine, then why would it ever need a tunnel to guide it home? What if the real journey begins only when you dare to step away from the light everyone else follows? What if your greatest awakening is still ahead of you? The search for truth does not end here. It begins now with you.